The tow truck arrived just after dawn, its yellow emergency lights painting silent, sweeping circles across the front of my house. I stood at my living room window, a cup of lukewarm tea held in my hands, and watched. There was no panic in my chest, no frantic urge to run outside and stop them. There was only a quiet, hollow stillness. The men worked efficiently, their movements practiced and impersonal. They attached the heavy chains to the front axle of the pearl-white SUV, the one that had been parked in front of my house like a trophy for the past 3 weeks. It was a beautiful car, the kind of vehicle that made neighbors stop and stare, its paint shimmering like crushed pearls under the morning sun. A cage made of pearl and chrome, with a low hydraulic hiss. The front wheels lifted off the ground, the proud vehicle now humbled, ready to be towed away like a piece of evidence. I took a slow sip of my tea. The taste was bitter. But that was the end of the story. The beginning had started 3 weeks earlier, with a different cup of coffee and a number on a screen that didn't make any sense. 3 weeks earlier, my morning had been like any other in Maple Creek, Ohio. The sun streamed through my kitchen window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I had lived in this house for 45 years, 30 of them with my husband, David, and the last 5 alone. The quiet was a familiar companion now. My routine was my anchor, coffee first, then tending to the small garden in the back, and finally, sitting down at the old oak table to pay my monthly bills. It was a simple life, funded by my Social Security and David's modest pension. It wasn't extravagant, but it was enough. It was stable. I cherished that stability more than anything. My greatest joy, the sun in my solitary orbit, was my family. My daughter, Claire, her husband, Mark, and my grandson, Leo. They lived just 10 minutes away and were a constant presence in my life. Claire, my beautiful, vibrant daughter, would pop in for coffee several times a week. Mark, ambitious and always dressed for success, would bring Leo over on Sundays. And Leo, my sweet 16-year-old Leo, was the light of my life. I had helped raise him, babysitting on weekends so Claire and Mark could have their date nights, picking him up from school when they were stuck in meetings. I had poured my life into them, and I thought that love was a fortress, impenetrable and absolute. I was wrong. That morning, I logged into my bank account online. The page loaded, displaying the familiar layout of debits and credits. I had my checkbook ready, the stack of bills for the electricity, the water, and my supplemental health insurance neatly arranged beside my laptop. I scanned the list of recent transactions, my eyes tracing the usual small amounts groceries at Kroger, my prescription refill at CVS, a new book from the local shop. And then I saw it. A charge that made me stop breathing for a second. An automatic withdrawal for $850. Dated the 15th of the month. I scrolled back. There it was again. Last month, on the 15th, $850. The number was an alien invader on the peaceful landscape of my finances. It was nearly a third of my entire monthly income. My first thought was that it was a mistake. A bank error. It had to be. I had never authorized a payment that large. I lived carefully, budgeting every dollar. An unexpected expense of $85 would make me cautious for the rest of the month. $850 was catastrophic. My hand trembled as I reached for the phone. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I dialed the bank's customer service number, the cheerful hold music grating on my raw nerves. Finally, professional voice answered. Thank you for calling Midwest Trust Bank. This is Brenda. How can I help you today? I tried to keep my own voice steady. Hello, Brenda. My name is Eleanor Vance. I'm calling about a transaction on my account. There's an automatic payment for $850 that I don't recognize. There was the soft clicking of a keyboard on the other end. I see that. Mrs. Vance. An automatic debit. Let me just pull up the details for you. More clicking. The silence stretched, filled only by the frantic thumping in my ears. Okay, ma'am, I have it here. The payment is for a vehicle financing agreement. A what? The words came out as a whisper. A vehicle financing? I haven't bought a car in over a decade. My Buick is from 2008. Well, our records show a loan was approved 2 months ago. Ma'am, the agreement was finalized using your social security number and identification. My blood ran cold. My identification? What are you talking about? How much is this loan for? Brenda hesitated for a fraction of a second, the first hint of something other than professional detachment in her voice. The total amount financed, ma'am, is $75,000. $75,000. The number was so vast, so absurd, didn't even seem real. It was more money than I had in my entire savings. It was a debt that would follow me to my grave. My breath hitched. Who took out this loan? I stammered, even though a dark, terrible suspicion was already beginning to bloom in the pit of my stomach. The agreement is in your name, Mrs. Van, Brenda said coolly. Legally, you are the sole borrower. I hung up the phone without another word. The receiver felt impossibly heavy in my hand. My legs were weak, and I had to grip the edge of the kitchen counter to keep from collapsing. My mind was a whirlwind of confusion and terror. Identity theft. That's what this had to be. Some faceless criminal had stolen my information and ruined my life. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. For 68 years, I had been so careful. I shredded my mail. I never gave out my information online. How could this have happened? I stumbled from the kitchen into the living room, my legs moving on their own. I needed air. I needed to see something solid, something real. I walked to the large picture window that overlooked the quiet, tree-lined street. And that's when I saw it. Parked directly across from my driveway was a brand new SUV. It was a brilliant, pearlescent white, the kind of white that seemed to glow from within. It was huge, imposing, with gleaming chrome wheels and tinted windows. It was the kind of car a movie star would drive. It was the kind of car that screamed money and success. It was the car that my daughter, Claire, and my son-in-law, Mark, had proudly driven up in 2 months ago. The memory hit me with the force of a physical blow. I saw them as clearly as if they were standing in front of me now. Mark, grinning from ear to ear, patting the hood like it was a prized racehorse. Claire, her eyes sparkling, clinging to his arm. Can you believe it? Mom, she had chirped. Mark got that huge promotion at work. The one he's been working so hard for. We decided to finally get the car of our dreams. For the family. A promotion. The car of their dreams. They had lied. They had stood in my living room, accepted my hugs and my proud congratulations, and they had lied. The lies weren't just words. They were a performance. A carefully constructed fantasy. They had brought the car over every Sunday for dinner, recounting stories of how impressed their friends were, how much Leo loved the built-in entertainment system. And I had beamed with pride, so happy for their success, for the comfortable life they were building. A life, I now realized, that I was paying for. The nausea returned, but this time it was mixed with a grief so profound it felt like a physical wound. This wasn't a faceless criminal. This was my own flesh and blood. My only child. The baby I had rocked to sleep. The little girl whose scraped knees I had bandaged. The young woman whose college tuition I had paid for by working 2 jobs after David passed away. She had taken my name, my security, my future, and signed it over for a shiny metal box. For 68 years, I had believed that family was sacred, that children honored their parents. But in that moment, clutching the window frame with icy hands, I realized I had raised a stranger, a person capable of betraying me in the most cowardly way imaginable. I walked back to the kitchen on unsteady legs. The room Once a place of comfort, now felt like a cage. I saw the framed photos on the wall. Claire at her high school graduation. Claire on her wedding day. Claire holding a newborn Leo in her arms. In every photo, I was there beside her. My face alight with a love that felt foolish now. A love that had been weaponized against me. Just then, the doorbell rang. Its cheerful chime echoed the lie of my peaceful, happy home. I knew who it was before I even looked. It was Sunday, and they were here for lunch. For a horrifying second, I considered not answering, just hiding in the back of the house until they went away. But where would I hide? The truth was already inside, sitting at the bottom of my stomach like a stone. I took a deep, shuddering breath, smoothed the front of my apron, and walked to the door. I had to see their faces. I had to look into their eyes and see if I could find any trace of the people I thought I knew. I opened the door. A smile plastered on my face. A mask I didn't know how long I could keep from cracking. "Hi, Mom," Claire said, breezing past me with a kiss on the cheek that felt like a brand. Mark followed, carrying a store-bought dessert. Leo trailed behind them, headphones on, oblivious. The scent of Claire's expensive perfume filled my small hallway, a scent I now associated with the stench of deceit. The show was about to begin, and I, the unwitting sponsor, was forced to play my part. We sat around the old oak table, the same table where I had helped Claire with her homework and listened to Mark nervously ask for my blessing to marry her. On the table was the Sunday roast I had carefully prepared. The potatoes browned just the way Leo liked them. Everything on the outside was exactly as it should be. A perfect picture of suburban family bliss. But on the inside, silent, sickening earthquake was tearing my world apart. I tried to eat, but each bite of pot roast felt like chewing on ash. The food had no taste. "You've outdone yourself again, Eleanor," Mark said, gesturing theatrically with his fork. "Best roast in Maple Creek." He had a smile that never quite reached his eyes. A performer's smile that I had always found slightly unsettling, but had dismissed as a quirk. Now, I saw it for what it was, a mask. "It's just a simple recipe," I murmured, pushing a piece of carrot around my plate. Claire laughed, a light, tinkling sound that used to warm my heart. Today, it grated on my nerves. "Oh, Mom, you're so modest. Everything you make is wonderful." She patted my hand. Her touch was soft, her nails perfectly manicured, a stark contrast to my own, which were perpetually smudged with dirt from my garden. "So, Leo," Mark said, turning to my grandson, "tell your grandma what happened at school on Friday." Leo pulled off his headphones, his face lighting up. "Oh, yeah, Dad picked me up in the new car, and a bunch of my friends saw it. Jason, you know, the captain of the football team?" His jaw literally dropped. He was like, "Dude, is that your car?" It was so cool. "Cool. Huh?" Mark chuckled, puffing out his chest. "No more being embarrassed when your old man picks you up, right?" Embarrassed? The word snagged in my mind, a sharp hook in a tapestry of lies. My old Buick. I had used that car to drive Leo to his first day of kindergarten. I had used it to take him to the doctor when he had a fever, to drive him to baseball practice, to the movies with his friends. It had never occurred to me that my car, my reliable, paid-for, slightly dented Buick, was a source of shame for him, for them. I looked at Claire, searching for some sign of disagreement, some flicker of loyalty, but she just smiled and nodded. "It's true, Mom. It's nice for Leo to have something to be proud of. It's important at his age." So, they were ashamed of me, ashamed of the life I had provided, the sacrifices I had made. The woman who had worked 2 jobs to pay for Claire's college degree, who had cared for Leo for free whenever they wanted to take a romantic getaway to reconnect. The pot roast turned to cement in my throat, a dull, Burning rage began to smolder in my chest. An acid reflux of the soul. You have no idea how good it feels. Mark continued, cutting his meat with a flourish. 45 years old. And I can finally give my family the best. A luxury SUV. Leather seats. A state-of-the-art sound system. Claire deserves this. Leo deserves this. Claire reached over and squeezed his hand. You worked so hard for this. Honey. We deserve to be happy. We deserve to be happy. The words echoed in the sudden silence of my mind. They deserve to be happy. And apparently, my financial security was the price of that happiness. They had decided, without consulting me, that my retirement fund was their dream fund. They had appointed me the silent, unknowing benefactor of their lavish lifestyle. Mom, are you okay? Claire asked, her brow furrowed in a performance of concern. You're awfully quiet today. I looked up from my plate and met her eyes. My daughter. My only child. The girl I had held when she had chickenpox. The teenager I had comforted when her first boyfriend broke her heart. Now she sat across from me, wearing a diamond ring that cost more than 2 months of my income, pretending to care about my well-being after she had forged my name on a $75,000 loan. I'm fine, dear, I said, my voice sounding distant, as if it belonged to someone else. Just thinking. Great, because we have some more exciting news, Mark announced, exchanging a conspiratorial glance with Claire. We're planning a trip to Disney World at the end of the year. It'll be Leo's first time on a plane. We want to make it unforgettable. Leo nearly jumped out of his chair. Seriously? Dad? Disney World? For real? I can tell all my friends? Of course. Son. You deserve to see the world. Mark said, beaming. I swallowed hard. Disney World. An international flight. They were spending my money on a luxury car, and now they were planning a lavish vacation. Meanwhile, I had canceled my dental appointment last month because the copay was too high. I had stopped buying the good brand of arthritis cream because I had to choose between it and the heating bill. But they were planning the vacation of a lifetime. A dream built on a foundation of my stolen future. That's wonderful, I managed to say, forcing a smile that felt like it was cracking my face. You all deserve it. After lunch, Mark settled in the living room to watch football. Leo went upstairs to my spare room, supposedly to do his homework but more likely to play games on his phone. Claire stayed behind to help me with the dishes, a ritual we had shared for years. It used to be a time of easy conversation, of mother-daughter intimacy. Today, it was a torture chamber. For a moment, I considered confronting her. I imagined myself throwing the bank statement down on the soapy counter and demanding to know how she could do this to me. But something held me back. Maybe it was a morbid curiosity to see how far they would take this lie. Or maybe it was the instinct of a 68-year-old woman who had learned that sometimes, the wisest move is to watch and wait. Mom, are you sure you're okay? Claire insisted, drying a plate with a clean dish towel. You seem off today. I'm fine, honey, just a little tired. She leaned in and gave me a kiss on the cheek. It was a familiar, affectionate gesture that I had always interpreted as genuine love. Now it felt calculated, a performance for an audience of one. You need to take better care of yourself. Mom, we don't want you getting sick. We don't want you getting sick. The words hung in the air between us. They didn't want me to get sick. But they didn't mind jeopardizing my retirement. They didn't mind using my name without permission. They didn't mind leaving me with barely enough money to cover my own essential expenses. They just didn't want me to get sick. Because then who would they turn to? Who would be their safety net? Their emergency contact? Their free babysitter? I was an asset. And they needed to keep their asset in working condition. That night, after they had all gone home, I sat alone in my dark kitchen. I looked out the window at the spot where the white SUV had been parked. The streetlights cast a pale glow on the empty asphalt, but I could still see the car in my mind's eye, its pearlescent paint gleaming under the moon. For a moment, I understood its allure. It was beautiful, powerful. It was the kind of car that made people look twice. It was a symbol of having made it. But it was my money paying for that symbol. My dreams being sacrificed for theirs. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. If there was anyone in the world who could give me honest, unfiltered advice, it was Sharon, my neighbor and my friend for over 20 years. The phone rang twice before she picked up. Eleanor? It's almost 10 o'clock. Is everything all right? Her voice was laced with sleep and immediate concern. Sharon, I need to talk to someone, I said, my voice finally cracking. Can you come over? I'll make us some chamomile tea. 15 minutes later, Sharon was sitting at my kitchen table, still in her bathrobe and slippers, her sharp, intelligent eyes fixed on my face. I told her everything. I started with the bank statement and the $850 charge. I told her about the phone call with the bank, the $75,000 loan. I told her about the lie of Mark's promotion, about the Disney World vacation plans. As I spoke, her eyes grew wider and wider, her expression shifting from concern to disbelief, and finally, to pure, unadulterated fury. Eleanor, that's not just betrayal, she exclaimed when I had finished, her voice a low, angry hiss. That's criminal. That's identity theft. They used your documents without your authorization. You can sue them. You can press charges. I shook my head, the motion feeling heavy and slow. Pressing charges would be a public scandal. Sharon, I don't want to see my family's name dragged through the mud. I don't want that for Leo. But you can't just let them get away with this, she insisted, her hand closing over mine on the tabletop. Her grip was firm, grounding. They are stealing from you. Eleanor, your own daughter is stealing from you. Sharon's words hurt because they were true. For years, I had gotten used to being their financial backstop. I'd lent them money they never paid back. I'd covered bills when they were a little short at the end of the month. I'd watched Leo for free so they could save on childcare. I had always told myself that's what mothers do. We help our children. But this wasn't help. This was exploitation. You know what hurts the most? I asked her, my eyes welling up with tears I had refused to shed all day. It's not even the money. It's the lie. It's the fact that they look me in the eye every single day and pretend to love me. They pretend to care, while they're using my name to live a life I am paying for. Sharon's face softened, but her eyes remained fierce. Eleanor, you raised that girl on your own after you lost David. You worked 2 jobs to put her through college. You've given everything to that family, and this is how they repay you. She was right. I knew she was right. But it was a bitter pill to swallow. For 68 years, I had been the fixer, the caregiver, the one who put everyone else's needs before her own. And now I was discovering that in their eyes, I wasn't a person with my own needs and rights. I was a resource, a bottomless well they could draw from whenever they pleased. What are you going to do? Sharon asked, her voice gentle now. I don't know yet, I said. I need to think. But as I said the words, an idea, cold and clear as ice, began to form in my mind. If they could use my name without my permission, perhaps I could make a few decisions without theirs. If they could lie to my face for months, perhaps it was time for me to stop being completely transparent with them. The woman they thought they knew, the soft, accommodating, endlessly forgiving mother, was gone. In her place, someone else was starting to wake up, and she was not happy. After Sharon went home, I lay awake in bed, staring at the shifting shadows on my ceiling. Sleep was a distant shore I couldn't reach. My mind, which was usually winding down by this hour with thoughts of garden mulch and grocery lists, was now a whirring engine of calculation and memory. I replayed my life, searching for the moment the dynamic had shifted, the point where my love had curdled into their entitlement. I remembered Claire's birth, the overwhelming wave of love and protectiveness I felt holding her tiny body in my arms. I had vowed to do anything to make her happy. And I had. I remembered the nights I worked late at the diner after my day job at the clinic, my feet aching, my body screaming for rest, just so I could afford the ballet lessons she desperately wanted. I remembered the pride that swelled in my chest at her college graduation, a pride that overshadowed my own exhaustion. I had seen her success as my success, her happiness as the ultimate return on my investment of love and sacrifice. And I remembered the day Mark had come to ask for her hand in marriage. He had sat on my living room sofa, his hands trembling slightly, and told me he would spend his life making my daughter happy. He said I was gaining a son, not losing a daughter. I had cried with joy that day. I thought I was welcoming a new pillar into our small family, not a parasite. Then came Leo, my sweet, beautiful grandson. I had practically co-raised him. I was the one who potty trained him, who taught him to read, who kissed his scraped knees. I was the one who sat with him for hours when Claire and Mark were too busy or stressed to deal with a sick child. He was more like a son to me than a grandson. But now I saw that to them, I was just convenient, the free, on-call grandmother who solved all the problems they didn't have the time or money to deal with themselves. Sometime before dawn, a cold determination settled over me. The grief was still there, a heavy ache in my chest, but it was now overlaid with something else, resolve. They had mistaken my kindness for weakness. They had mistaken my generosity for foolishness. It was a mistake they were going to regret. The next morning, I was up before the sun. I walked to the living room window. The white SUV was parked in its usual spot, gleaming in the pre-dawn light. Constant, silent reminder of their betrayal. But this time, instead of feeling pain, I felt a cold surge of purpose. I made my coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and spread out the bank statement again. I studied every line, every number, every detail of the fraudulent transaction. Then, I picked up my phone. It was time to stop feeling and start acting. My first call was back to the bank. I didn't ask for a customer service representative. I asked to speak directly to the branch manager. I explained the situation again. But this time my voice was different. There was no tremor, no uncertainty. I was calm, factual, and firm. I wanted to understand my exact rights as the account holder whose identity had been compromised. The manager, a man named Mr. Henderson, was much more helpful than the call center employee. He explained the process for contesting fraudulent charges and launching an investigation. He confirmed that since the loan was solely in my name, I was the sole legal owner of the vehicle. The title was mine. The debt was mine. And therefore, the rights were mine. My second call was to a family lawyer, a man named Howard Klein, who had helped me with David's will years ago. I framed my questions hypothetically, not wanting to name names just yet. I asked about the legal ramifications of someone using a family member's information to secure a loan. Howard was blunt. Legally, Eleanor, that's fraud and identity theft. It's a felony. The person who did that could face serious jail time. His words sent a chill down my spine, but they also armed me with the weight of the law. I wasn't just a wronged mother. I was a victim of a crime. My third call was to a local car dealership, one of the largest in the county. I didn't call the sales department. I called the used car acquisitions manager. I described the SUV make, model, year, condition and asked what their process was for buying a vehicle outright from a private seller. The man was enthusiastic. A late model, low-mileage luxury SUV was a high-demand item. He quoted me a ballpark figure that made my breath catch. He explained that all they would need was the title, a bill of sale, and the owner's signature. The owner's signature. My signature. As I was finishing my call, I heard the familiar rumble of Mark's old sedan pulling up outside. He was dropping Claire off before heading to work. He honked and waved at me through the kitchen window. That familiar, false smile plastered on his face. I waved back. My own smile now a carefully crafted weapon. It was no longer a smile of naivety. It was the smile of a woman who was slowly and methodically taking back control. A few minutes later, Claire came in for her customary morning coffee. It was a ritual I had always cherished. Quiet moment just for the two of us. But that morning, her every word sounded hollow. Every gesture a lie. "How are you today, Mom?" she asked, pouring cream into her mug. "You seemed worried yesterday." "I'm fine, dear," I said, watching her stir the sugar into her coffee. "Just thinking about life." "Thinking about what?" I looked at her. My beautiful 42-year-old daughter whom I loved more than life itself, and who was betraying me so casually. Just about how things change, I said, testing the waters. How people change. She laughed. That light, dismissive laugh. "You're getting philosophical, Mom. That comes with age." With age. As if my thoughts, my feelings, my very identity were just symptoms of senility. As if at 68, I no longer had the right to think deeply about my own life. It was condescending. And for the first time, I let the sting of it register. "Claire," I said, my voice even, "are you two doing okay financially? You're not struggling, are you?" She looked up, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. "Why do you ask?" "Just a mother's curiosity. Sometimes I worry about you two keeping up with all the expenses." "Oh, Mom, you don't need to worry about us," she said, waving a dismissive hand. "Mark is doing great at work. In fact, he said there might be another bonus coming at the end of the year." Lie upon lie. It wasn't enough to use my name to buy the car. They had to invent a whole narrative of promotions and bonuses to justify a lifestyle they were funding with my retirement. "That's good to hear," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "I'm glad you're prospering." Then she turned the tables. "And you, Mom? How are your finances? Are you managing okay on your pension?" The question caught me off guard. Was she probing? Suspecting that I'd found out? Or was it just idle chatter? The ultimate display of her oblivious hypocrisy? "I manage," I said carefully. "There isn't much left over. But I can cover the basics." "Well, if you ever need anything, you just let me know," she said, her voice dripping with false sincerity. "Mark and I can always help out." Help out. She said it as if she weren't already siphoning hundreds of dollars from my account every month. She offered to help, as if the money vanishing from my account was invisible to her. A phantom transaction in a world where only her needs were real. The audacity of it was breathtaking. After she left, I sat alone in the quiet kitchen, finishing my coffee. Did they really think I was that stupid? Did they think a 68-year-old woman was incapable of reading a bank statement, incapable of making a phone call, incapable of defending herself? They had completely underestimated the person I had become after 5 years of living alone, of making my own decisions, of surviving my own grief. I had been a widow, not an invalid. That afternoon, while they were all out, I walked across the street and looked at the SUV up close. I had to admit, it was a magnificent machine. Beige leather interior, chrome wheels, a digital dashboard that looked like the cockpit of a spaceship. The kind of car I had never even dreamed of owning, but was paying for nonetheless. I took out my cell phone and took several pictures of it from different angles. Then I wrote down the license plate number and the VIN I could see through the windshield. I went back inside. I had some research to do online, some more calls to make, some plans to finalize. If Claire and Mark thought they could use me as their helpless, elderly cash machine, they were mistaken. If they thought I would passively accept this situation, They were profoundly mistaken. I had spent decades being generous, being understanding, being the perfect mother and mother-in-law. But forced generosity isn't generosity. It's exploitation. And I was done being exploited. That night, as I lay in bed, a calm smile formed on my face. For the first time in months, maybe even years, I felt in control of my own life. They had made a crucial mistake in underestimating me, and now they were about to discover that the quiet, kind woman they knew also had a spine of steel they never imagined existed. The car continued to sit outside, shining under the streetlight, but now, every time I looked at it, I no longer felt despair or sadness. I felt a cold, calculated determination. They wanted to play this game of deception. They were about to find out that I could play it much, much better. And unlike them, I didn't need to lie to win. The following weeks were a masterclass in self-control. Each time an alert from my bank popped up on my phone, signaling another purchase on the secret credit card or another withdrawal I hadn't authorized, it was like a fresh stab. The automatic payment for the car was due on the 15th. I watched the date approach on the calendar like a ticking bomb. While I was at the grocery store, carefully using coupons and choosing the store brand items, I imagined Claire at a boutique, swiping the credit card with my name on it. While I was turning down my thermostat to save on the heating bill, I imagined Mark filling up the SUV's massive gas tank, a cost I was indirectly covering. They continued to act as if nothing was wrong, their behavior a surreal performance of normalcy. In fact, their requests for money became even bolder. One Thursday morning, Mark showed up at my door with that practiced, charming smile. "Eleanor, could I trouble you for a small loan? Just $300. The credit card is maxed out, and we need to get some groceries for the house." $300. On top of the $850 for the car payment. On top of the unknown amounts being charged to the credit card. On top of the expensive gifts I bought for Leo. On top of the countless other times I had helped out. And he still had the nerve to ask for more. As if I were a magical, self-replenishing spring of cash. "Of course, Mark," I replied, my own smile now a well-rehearsed mask. "Let me get my purse." I handed him the bills and watched him tuck the money into his wallet with the casual air of someone taking what was rightfully theirs. There was no effusive thank you. No "you're a lifesaver." Not even a vague promise of paying it back. To him, my money was an acquired right. "By the way," he said, already turning toward the door, "I'm having a bit of a problem with fuel. Gas prices are insane, and I'm spending a fortune on my commute. Do you think you could maybe help out with, say, $100 a week for gas? $100 a week. For $100 a month. Just for fuel. For the car I was already paying for." I almost laughed at the sheer audacity, but I managed to maintain my composure. "I'll think about your request, Mark," I said calmly. "I'll talk to Claire about it." When he left, I stood in the living room, looking out the window at the car that was costing me a fortune. He waved at me before getting in. That mechanical, exemplary son-in-law wave. But now I saw the gesture for what it truly was. A performance to maintain appearances while he systematically bled me dry. That afternoon, I decided to do something I hadn't done in a long time. I sat down at my kitchen table with bank statements from the past 2 years and a calculator. I started adding it all up. The loans for emergencies that were never paid back. The large checks I had written for home repairs or unexpected bills. What I discovered made me physically ill. Over the past 24 months, I had given Claire and Mark more than $15,000. $15,000 that had vanished without a trace, never to be mentioned again. I remembered each occasion with painful clarity. The $2,000 Claire needed for a life-changing cosmetology course she dropped out of after 3 weeks. The $3,000 Mark borrowed to invest in a once-in-a-lifetime business opportunity that was never spoken of again. The $5,000 they needed to remodel the kitchen. which they actually spent on a beach vacation they proudly posted all over social media. And now, on top of that history of financial leeching, they had used my name to finance a $75,000 car. The scale of their entitlement was staggering. On Friday, Claire came for lunch, as she often did. It was a ritual I had always cherished, a small island of connection in my quiet week. But now, watching her sit at my table, using the silverware I had inherited from my own mother, eating the food I had prepared, everything felt tainted. It was like watching a play where I was the only one who knew the actors were liars. "Mom, you've been acting so strange lately," she said, pushing a lettuce leaf around her plate. "Are you sure everything's okay? No health problems?" "I'm perfectly fine, dear. Why do you ask?" I replied, my voice a placid lake under which a storm was raging. "I don't know. You're just quieter. Less present." Less present. She was complaining that I was less present after I discovered she had committed fraud in my name. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. "I'm just thinking about life, Claire. Reflecting on the choices I've made." "What choices?" she asked, a hint of impatience in her tone. I looked at her, my 42-year-old daughter, and for a fleeting second, I saw the 5-year-old who used to hide behind my legs when she was scared. I remembered all the nights I'd stayed up with her when she was sick, all the weekends I'd worked extra shifts to buy the toys she wanted, all my own small dreams I'd set aside to fund hers. Choices about family, I said slowly. About generosity. About boundaries. She frowned. "Mom, you're talking in riddles. Did something specific happen?" It was the perfect opening. I could have thrown the printouts from the bank on the table right then. I could have demanded an answer. But something still held me back. It wasn't weakness. It was a cold, calculated curiosity. I wanted to know the full depth of their deception. I had learned that information was power, and I needed to have all the facts before I made my move. Nothing specific, honey. Just the reflections of a 68-year-old woman. She laughed, a sound that now struck me as deeply condescending. "You're getting so philosophical. Mom, be careful you don't get depressed. If you want, I can make an appointment for you with a therapist. Mark knows a really good one." A therapist. She was suggesting my change in behavior was a mental health issue, not the natural reaction of a person who had discovered she was being systematically robbed by her own family. She wanted to pathologize my awareness, to label my clarity as confusion. It was a classic manipulator's tactic. If you can't control the situation, try to convince the other person they're crazy. That won't be necessary, dear. I'm fine. While we washed the dishes together after lunch, Claire started talking about their plans for the Disney trip. It was becoming more concrete. They had researched hotels, park tickets, character breakfasts. Leo was counting down the days. "It's going to be unforgettable," she said, her eyes shining as she dried a plate. "Leo deserves to see the world, to have experiences we never had at his age." Experiences we never had. She was right about that. When Claire was 16, I was working 2 jobs to save for her college fund. There was no money for international travel. There was barely money for a movie on a Saturday night. But I had never regretted those sacrifices. I had made them willingly, with a full heart, for her future. Now, she was providing her son with the experiences I couldn't give her. But she was doing it with my money, without asking me, without including me, without even acknowledging my unwilling contribution. "It's important," I agreed, my voice carefully neutral. "Experiences shape our lives." Exactly. That's why Mark is working so hard. He wants to give his family the best. Mark is working so hard. The lie was repeated with such ease, such naturalness, that for a split second, I almost believed it. Mark, who had used my good credit because he couldn't get the loan on his own. Mark, who drove a car financed in my name every single day. Mark, who had the audacity to ask me for gas money. That Mark. That night, after she left, I stayed in the living room, looking at the family photos arranged on the mantelpiece. Pictures from every stage of Claire's life. A chubby baby, a gap-toothed child, a rebellious teenager, a radiant bride. In so many of them, I was there by her side, always smiling, always proud. I picked up her wedding photo. I was standing next to her, wearing a powder blue dress I had splurged on for the occasion, beaming from ear to ear. I remembered how much I had contributed to that wedding. Not just the dress, but a substantial check for the reception, the expensive stand mixer they'd registered for, a generous contribution to their honeymoon fund. All given with love. All from the heart. Mark was in the photo too. Young and handsome. His arm around my daughter. On their wedding day, he had hugged me and said he wasn't just gaining a wife, but a second mother. He said I could count on him for anything. Beautiful promises that had evaporated like mist over the years. I picked up another photo. This one of Leo, about 5 years old, sitting on my lap. We were both grinning at the camera. I remembered all the weekends I had watched him so Claire and Mark could have a break. All the nights he had slept over when they traveled. All the gifts I'd bought. The doctor's appointments I'd taken him to. The homework I'd helped him with. Even Leo, who had always been so affectionate, was starting to change. It wasn't malice on his part. It was simply a reflection of the environment he lived in. When parents treat the grandmother like a convenience, the children learn to do the same. The following week, I decided to run a series of tests. On Monday, I called Claire. "Honey," I said, putting a slight strain in my voice. "My back is really acting up. I have a doctor's appointment this afternoon, but I really don't feel up to driving. Could one of you possibly take me?" There was a pause. "Oh, Mom, that's a shame. Today is just impossible for me. I have back-to-back meetings, and Mark is swamped at work. Can't you just call an Uber?" An Uber. For an $80 doctor's visit. She was suggesting I spend another $20 or $30 on transportation, rather than giving her own mother a ride. The mother who was financing her luxury car. "I suppose I can. Dear. Don't worry about it." "Great. Let me know if it's anything serious." "Okay. If it's anything serious." As if a 68-year-old's health was a minor inconvenience, only worthy of her attention if it became a crisis that might affect my ability to continue being useful to them. The next day, I ran another test. I called to say I had a plumbing emergency, that a pipe had burst under the sink and water was leaking everywhere. I needed help. Urgently. The response was similar. Mark was super busy. Claire had unavoidable commitments. They suggested I call a plumber. As if the $1,000 for an emergency repair was pocket change for a retiree. But the following week, when Claire called to ask if I could watch Leo for the entire weekend because they were going to a couple's spa retreat, of course, I was expected to be available. When Mark showed up asking for another loan for another emergency, of course, I was expected to be understanding and generous. The pattern was crystal clear. I existed to solve their problems, but they did not exist to solve mine. I was a free babysitter, a private bank, an emotional support hotline. But when I needed a ride, a helping hand, or simply some of their time, there were always urgent, unavoidable excuses. The realization didn't just hurt. It clarified things with a cold, hard light. I had been a devoted mother, a welcoming mother-in-law, a present grandmother. I had given my all to this family. In return, they saw me not as a person, but as an extension of themselves, a resource that existed to serve their needs. The worst part was realizing this dynamic hadn't started with the car. It had been building for years. A slow erosion of boundaries, one small concession at a time. I had thought I was being generous. In reality, I had been teaching them how to disrespect me. On Tuesday, Sharon came for coffee and brought some unsettling news. She had run into a former neighbor of ours, a woman named Carol who now worked as a teller at my bank. Eleanor, Sharon said, lowering her voice. Carol told me something worrying. She said she noticed some unusual activity on your account over the last few months. She couldn't give me details because of privacy rules, but she said if it were her, she'd be concerned. My heart sped up. Could there be more? Other things I hadn't discovered yet? Other schemes Claire and Mark had concocted using my name? Did she say anything else? I asked, my voice tight. Just that I should suggest you go to the bank in person and ask for a complete, detailed statement for the last 6 months. She said that sometimes seniors don't realize when someone is taking advantage of their trust. Seniors. The word bothered me. Not because of the age itself, but because of the implication of vulnerability, of naivety, of being someone who could be easily fooled. Is that how everyone saw me? As a sweet old lady who wouldn't notice she was being robbed blind? I'm going to the bank tomorrow. I decided. My voice hard as flint. I want to see every single penny. That night, I barely slept. My mind raced, imagining what other betrayals I might uncover. Had they taken out other loans? Other credit cards? My trust in them was so completely shattered that anything now seemed possible. The next morning, I was at the bank the moment it opened. I asked to speak with Mr. Henderson, the manager. I requested a complete printout of all transactions linked to my Social Security number for the past 2 years. Every direct debit, every automatic payment, every line of credit. He led me to a small, private office and returned a few minutes later with a thick stack of papers. I sat there for nearly an hour, reading through the documents page by page. What I found made my legs go weak. It was so much worse than I had imagined. In addition to the car loan, there was a credit card, a high-limit card with my name on it, but with Claire listed as an authorized user. The statements were a roadmap of their luxurious lies. There were charges for expensive dinners at downtown restaurants I'd never been to, purchases from high-end clothing stores, tickets to concerts, and a recurring monthly charge for a premium family cell phone plan. The spending averaged nearly $2,000 a month. And there was more. A direct debit for a top-tier family health insurance plan. A plan that covered not only Claire and Mark, but Leo as well. It cost over $600 a month. My own supplemental plan cost less than a third of that. I did the math, my hand shaking so much the numbers were barely legible. The car payment, $850. The credit card, averaging $2,000. The health insurance, $600. They were draining over $3,000 a month from me. My entire income was just over $3,200. They were living on my money, while I was surviving on the crumbs they left behind. Mr. Henderson sat opposite me, his expression a mixture of pity and professional embarrassment. It was obvious to him what was happening, but he had to be delicate. Mrs. Vance, he said gently, did you authorize all of these accounts? Are you aware of all these products? I authorized none of it. I replied, my voice dangerously calm. I want to contest every single transaction and cancel everything immediately. I understand, he said. I will start the fraud investigation process. But you should know, this may cause some family friction, as the accounts appear to be used by people close to you. Family friction. As if the family wasn't already fractured beyond repair by betrayal and deceit. That's not a problem, I said, my voice like ice. I want everything canceled. Today. I walked out of the bank with a heavy briefcase full of documents and a strange emptiness in my chest. It wasn't anger anymore. Not exactly. It was a cold, desolate clarity. Now I knew the full extent of the betrayal. It wasn't a single act of desperation. It was a calculated, long-term campaign to financially drain me. When I got home, the pearl-white SUV was parked in its usual spot, gleaming in the midday sun. Mark had probably taken Claire out for a nice lunch, using my credit card to pay the bill, chatting happily about the future I was unknowingly funding. I sat in my armchair and opened the briefcase. I spread the documents out on the coffee table, the evidence of their greed. I studied every statement, every charge, every signature that wasn't mine. I needed to understand the situation perfectly before I made my final move. Because one thing had become irrevocably clear. I was no longer the generous, naive woman they thought they knew. I was a 68-year-old woman who had just discovered her own strength, and I was about to use it. The next morning, I woke up at 5 a.m. with a mental clarity I hadn't felt in years. The fog of grief and shock had burned away, leaving behind a cold, hard landscape of purpose. I made my coffee in the silent kitchen, sat at the table with all the bank documents spread out before me, and began to meticulously plan each step. If Claire and Mark thought they could use me as a helpless old woman, they were about to discover they had profoundly underestimated the woman I had become. I waited. Patience, I had learned, was a form of power. I waited until Mark left for work in the car I was paying for. I waited until Claire drove Leo to school. At 8:30 a.m., when I was certain they were both occupied with their routines, I picked up my phone and began the first phase of my counteroffensive. The first call was back to Mr. Henderson at the bank. I spoke with a calm authority that surprised even myself. Mr. Henderson, it's Eleanor Vance. I am formally confirming my request from yesterday. I want all unauthorized automatic debits canceled immediately. The car financing, the credit card account, the premium health insurance plan. I want it all shut down today. He was prepared for my call. Of course, Mrs. Vance. I've already initiated the process. The cancellations will take effect within 48 hours. The credit card account has already been frozen. You'll receive written confirmation in the mail. Thank you, I said. One more thing. Please confirm that as the sole name on the vehicle loan, the title is legally and exclusively mine. That is correct. He confirmed. You are the legal owner of the vehicle. The second call was to the acquisitions manager at the car dealership, the man I had spoken to a few days prior. I told him I was ready to move forward. I need to sell the vehicle urgently due to a family financial crisis. I explained, the irony of my words not lost on me. I am the legal owner and have the title. Can you send someone to appraise it today? He was more than happy to oblige. A high-value vehicle from a motivated seller was a golden opportunity. He promised to have an appraiser at my house within 2 hours. They had a program for situations like this, he explained, where they could make an offer and complete the entire transaction, including payment and vehicle pickup, on the same day. The owner just needs to be present with the title and a valid ID to sign the paperwork, he said. Perfect. Claire and Mark had possession of the car, but I held the power of ownership. The third call was the most emotionally difficult, but necessary. I called Howard Klein, the lawyer. Again. This time, I didn't speak in hypotheticals. I told him the whole sordid story, my voice steady and factual. The misuse of my documents, the unauthorized loans, the systematic exploitation of my finances. Howard listened in silence, his only interruptions being a few sharp, technical questions. When I finished, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. Eleanor, he finally said, his voice grave. What you're describing is a clear case of elder financial abuse and identity theft. It's a serious crime. You have every right not only to reverse all of this, but to press criminal charges. I don't want to press charges, Howard, I said. The thought of seeing my own daughter in a courtroom making my stomach churn. They are my family. I just want them to stop using me. I want my life back. I understand, he said. But you need to protect yourself. Document everything. Keep copies of every statement, every cancellation notice, every piece of correspondence. If they try to fight this or cause you trouble, you will need to prove that you acted within your rights as the victim of their fraud. I spent the rest of the morning organizing a thick folder. It was my war chest. Copies of the bank statements with the fraudulent charges highlighted. The protocol numbers from my calls with the bank. The notes from my conversation with the lawyer. If they wanted to play a game of paperwork, I would show them how an organized, 68-year-old woman does it right. Around noon, just as the appraiser from the dealership was finishing his inspection of the SUV, Claire showed up for her now dreaded lunch visit. I saw her car pull up and quickly ushered the appraiser to the side of the house to finalize the numbers. Out of her line of sight, I watched her walk into my kitchen with her usual breezy confidence, kissing my cheek, completely oblivious to the fact that the foundation of her comfortable life was being dismantled just a few yards away. "How was your morning, Mom?" she asked, pouring herself a glass of iced tea. "Productive, dear," I said, my heart hammering but my voice serene. I was just taking care of some financial loose ends. "What kind of loose ends?" she asked, a flicker of something curiosity, suspicion, in her eyes. I gave her a placid smile. "Oh, you know, retiree stuff, organizing my accounts, getting a better handle on where my money is going." She laughed that condescending laugh again. "You're getting so organized lately. That's good." If only she knew how organized I was becoming. If only she knew that at that very moment, the automatic payments that sustained her lifestyle were being systematically shut down, one by one. "Claire," I said, deciding to probe one last time, "are you and Mark happy with your life?" "Of course, Mom. Why do you ask such a strange question?" "No reason. It just seems like you're living so well. The new car. The plans for Disney. It's a lot." "Well, like I said, Mark is working very hard to provide the best for his family," she recited, the familiar line now sounding rote and absurd. "He's a dedicated husband and father." A dedicated husband and father who used his mother-in-law's identity to finance a life he couldn't afford. An interesting definition of dedication. "And you've never thought about being more financially independent?" I pressed gently. "Not having to rely on outside help?" She looked at me with a genuinely confused expression. "What outside help, Mom?" The sheer nerve of it was stunning. Thousands of dollars a month flowing from my account to hers. And she had the audacity to ask, "What outside help?" As if she were a completely self-sufficient adult. "Nothing specific, dear," I said, turning away to hide the look on my face. "I just think it's important for couples to have their own financial autonomy." "Oh, I agree," she said brightly. "Mark always says that. He insists that we be independent. Independent, while using my money to pay for their car, their credit card bills, and their health insurance." Their ability to twist reality to fit their narrative was almost an art form. After lunch, while we were washing dishes, Claire started talking about Leo, how he was growing into such a responsible young man, getting good grades. She talked about his future, the college he wanted to attend, and how they were saving diligently to ensure he had a good education. "It's our number one priority," she said, drawing a glass. "Mark is even considering getting a second job to make sure Leo has every opportunity." A second job, while he was actively stealing from me to fund his first one. The hypocrisy was so profound it was almost comical. "That's good that you're thinking of Leo's future," I said, my voice flat. "A mother will make any sacrifice for her children, won't she?" I looked directly at her as I said it. For a split second, I saw a flicker of discomfort in her eyes before it was quickly masked by a smile. After she left, I stood alone in the kitchen, the silence a welcome relief. The naturalness with which she lied was disturbing. It wasn't just evasion or half-truths. It was an elaborate, constructed reality, a fiction they had both agreed to live in. And they expected me to live in it too. Later that afternoon, Mark appeared. He needed more money. This time, the excuse was an urgent bathroom renovation. A major leak had been discovered behind the wall, he claimed, and if they didn't fix it immediately, it could cause structural damage. He needed $800 for the plumber and materials. Eleanor, it's a real emergency, he said, his face a mask of manufactured panic. We have to get this sorted out right away. $800. On top of the thousands already being drained from my account. On top of the endless stream of loans that were never repaid. And he still used the word emergency, as if this were the first time he had ever asked for anything. Of course, Mark, I said, my voice smooth as silk. Let me get my purse. I handed him the cash, watching his reaction closely. There was no surprise at my easy compliance, no excessive gratitude, not even a hint of discomfort at having to ask yet again. For him, my money was a natural resource, like water from a tap or air to breathe. As he was leaving, he paused at the door. Oh, and Eleanor, that fuel problem we talked about, have you had a chance to think about a solution? The fuel problem. For the car I was financing. The car he drove every day. The car that, at that very moment, I had a signed offer to sell sitting in a folder in my bedroom. I am thinking about a permanent solution to that issue. Mark, I said, my smile unwavering. Great, he said, relieved. Gas prices just keep going up. It's getting tough to maintain the car. Tough to maintain the car. The car for which he did not pay a single cent. The sheer lack of self-awareness was astounding. He was complaining about the cost of maintaining stolen goods to the person he had stolen them from. On Thursday, I received a call from Mr. Henderson at the bank. He confirmed that all the cancellations had been fully processed. The financing company for the car had been notified that the automatic payments were being stopped due to a fraud claim. The credit card was deactivated. The health insurance policy was terminated. In less than 72 hours, the comfortable, subsidized world of Claire and Mark was going to come to a screeching halt. Friday morning was the moment of truth. The dealership sent a flatbed tow truck and a representative with a cashier's check. The offer was for $58,000. It was less than what was owed on the loan. But the dealership had a financing arm that would handle the difference. And the amount was enough to clear the fraudulent debt from my name completely. More importantly, it would free me. The paperwork is all in order, the representative said. A polite young man named Kevin. The vehicle is in excellent condition. We can close the deal right now. Ma'am, if you'd like. Yes, I would, I said, my voice clear and steady. Let's get it done. Claire and Mark had left early. He had a meeting across town, and she was taking Leo for a college tour. The timing was perfect. Within an hour, all the papers were signed, the title was transferred, and I had a receipt confirming the loan had been paid in full. I stood at my living room window and watched as the tow truck driver expertly winched the pearl-white SUV onto the flatbed. It was a beautiful car, I had to admit. But it wasn't worth my dignity. It wasn't worth my peace of mind. It wasn't worth the humiliation of being robbed by my own children. At 5 p.m., the first call came. It was Mark. His voice was tight with a panicky edge. Eleanor, the car is gone. It's not where I parked it this morning. Did you see anything? Did someone mess with it? How strange. Mark, I said, my voice a symphony of calm innocence. Are you sure that's where you left it? Positive. I left it right in front of your house, like I always do. I'm calling the police. It must have been stolen. Now. Hold on. Mark, I said, letting a thoughtful pause hang in the air. Before you involve the police, don't you think you should check with the financing company? Sometimes, they repossess vehicles when there are problems with the payments. Silence on the other end of the line. A long, heavy silence, pregnant with dawning comprehension. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head, connecting the dots. What kind of problems? Eleanor? He finally asked, his voice low and dangerous. Oh, I don't know, I said, my voice light and airy. Problems like unauthorized loans being contested, automatic payments being canceled, bank fraud investigations. Another silence, this one even more profound. Then, a sharp, indrawn breath. Did you do something? I simply exercised my rights as the legal owner of the vehicle. Mark, I stated, my voice losing all its feigned innocence and taking on the cold, hard edge of steel. The vehicle that was registered in my name and financed with my stolen identity. The line went dead. He had hung up on me. 15 minutes later, my phone rang again. This time, it was Claire. And she was screaming, Mom, what did you do? Her voice was a shriek, a raw nerve of panic and fury transmitted through the phone. Mark just called me. He said you sold the car. That can't be true. Tell me it's not true. It's true, Claire, I said, my own voice a stark contrast to hers, calm, measured, and unyielding. I sold my car. Your car? That was our car. We were the ones who used it. She yelled, her words tumbling over each other in a torrent of disbelief. It was financed in my name, with my social security number, jeopardizing my retirement. I replied, reciting the facts like a mantra I had practiced. Legally, Claire, it was always my car. But Mom, have you gone crazy? How could you do this to us? What about our plans? What about Leo's trip? What about Mark's job? The litany of their needs, their plans, their lives. There was no mention of me, of my finances, of my security. I was an invisible character in the drama of their lives, the silent stagehand whose job was to make sure the props were in place. What about your plans, Claire? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. The plans you made with my money, without my consent. The trip you were going to pay for with my retirement savings. The job Mark couldn't even get to without the car I was paying for. I let the questions hang in the air, each one a small, sharp indictment. But Mom, she stammered, her anger beginning to curdle into desperation. We're your family. We didn't ask you because we knew you'd say yes. The logic of it was so twisted, so profoundly self-serving, that it almost made me laugh. If you were so sure I'd say yes, Claire, then why didn't you ask? Silence. The beautiful, irrefutable silence of a lie being exposed to the light. Her warped reasoning had hit a brick wall. Mom, we need to talk about this in person, she said, her voice dropping to a pleading whisper. This is all a terrible misunderstanding. It's not a misunderstanding, Claire, I said, my voice as cold and clear as a winter morning. It's a consequence. I ended the call. 2 hours later, they were at my door. Claire's eyes were red and swollen from crying. Mark's face was a blotchy mask of contained rage. And Leo stood between them, his expression a painful mixture of confusion and fear. He was the innocent collateral damage in a war he didn't understand. For the first time in years, perhaps in my entire adult life as a mother, I was in control of the situation. They were on my turf, seeking something from me, and for the first time, the answer was no. I let them in but didn't offer them a seat. We stood in the entryway, the air thick with unspoken accusations and years of resentment. Mom, Claire began, her voice trembling. Please. Let's just talk about this calmly. There has to be a solution. The solution is simple. I replied, my voice firm. You will stop using my name and my money without my permission. Mark exploded. The carefully constructed facade of the charming son-in-law disintegrated, revealing the entitled, angry man beneath. You can't do this to us, Eleanor. We have responsibilities. We have a mortgage. How am I supposed to get to work without a car? The same way you got to work before you committed fraud to get one. Mark, I said, my gaze unflinching. It was a misunderstanding. He insisted, his voice rising. We thought you would have been fine with it. You thought I would be fine with it, without my ever knowing about it? I asked, my voice dripping with sarcasm. That's an interesting theory of consent. Mark. Leo, who had been silent until now, stepped forward. His eyes were full of tears, and his face was pale. Grandma, why did you do it? He asked, his young voice cracking. Now we can't go to Disney World. My heart, which had felt like a block of ice, threatened to splinter. He was a child. He didn't understand the complexities of finance and betrayal. He only understood that his dream had been taken away. It was a low blow, whether they had coached him to say it or not. But I couldn't let emotional blackmail work. Not now. Leo, my sweet boy, I said, my voice softening for the first time. Grandma didn't do anything wrong. I was just protecting my money from people who were using it without asking. But we're family, Claire cried, seizing the opening. Family helps each other. Claire, they don't steal from each other. I retorted, my voice hardening again. Family is built on trust and respect. You took a sledgehammer to both. Mark tried one last, desperate tactic. Eleanor, look, if you give us the money from the sale, we promise we'll sort everything out. We'll make a new contract. We'll pay you back for the installments. We'll make it right. I looked at him, at his desperate, bargaining face, and I felt a sliver of pity, but it was quickly extinguished by the memory of his arrogance just a few days before, asking me for gas money for a car he had stolen. Mark, there is no money to give you. The proceeds from the sale were used to pay off the fraudulent loan you took out in my name. I don't have a windfall of cash. I just have my debt cleared. The small amount left over is mine. By right. The finality in my voice must have hit them. The reality of their situation finally sank in. There was no going back. There was no negotiation. There was no easy fix. The car was gone. The credit card was frozen. The health insurance was canceled. Their entire financial house of cards, built on the foundation of my identity, had collapsed. They stayed for another hour, their tactics shifting in a desperate dance. They pleaded. They made veiled threats about how this would tear the family apart. They tried more emotional blackmail involving Leo. They attempted to bargain, making promises I knew they would never keep. But I remained immovable. I was a rock, an island against which their waves of manipulation crashed and receded. I had crossed a line in my own mind, and I had no intention of ever going back. When they finally accepted defeat and turned to leave, Claire paused at the door. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a toxic brew of despair and resentment. You've destroyed our family, Mom. No, Claire, I said, my voice tired but certain. Your lies destroyed this family. Your greed destroyed it. I just stopped enabling it. They left, walking down the driveway because they no longer had a car. I watched them from the window. Mark was gesturing angrily, his words lost to the glass. Claire was wiping her eyes. And Leo, my poor Leo, kept looking back at my house, his face a portrait of confusion. For a moment, a sharp pang of doubt pierced my resolve. Had I been too harsh? Too drastic? Should I have tried to talk to them first? To find another way? But then the images flooded my mind, the bank statement, the thousands of dollars hemorrhaging from my account, the casual way they lied to my face, the condescending offer to find me a therapist when my only illness was awareness. No, I had done the right thing. For the first time in decades, I had put myself first. I had defended my rights, protected my future, and preserved my dignity. That night, I sat in my favorite armchair in the quiet living room. I looked out at the empty street where the symbol of my humiliation had once been parked. Now, there was just an empty space. But I didn't feel empty. I felt whole. I felt like myself again. Eleanor Vance. Not just mom or grandma. A person. My phone rang several times throughout the evening. Claire. Trying for another round of negotiation. Mark. Wanting to clarify some misunderstandings. Even my sister called. Having received a frantic, one-sided version of the story from Claire. I didn't answer any of them. There is a time for talking. And there is a time for consequences. The time for talking had passed 2 months ago, when they decided to commit fraud in my name. This was the time for consequences. And for the first time in a very long time, I was at peace with that. The first few days after the confrontation were the quietest I had experienced in decades. My phone, which once buzzed constantly with their manufactured emergencies and requests, now sat silent on the counter. My house, which had been their second home, their drop-in daycare, and their private restaurant, became a sanctuary of peace I had forgotten how much I valued. On the second day, Sharon came to visit, carrying a plate of homemade cookies and a worried expression. She had run into Claire at the supermarket and had witnessed a scene that had clearly disturbed her. "Eleanor," she said, sitting down at my kitchen table, "I saw your daughter yesterday. She was crying in the cleaning aisle, talking on her phone to someone about money. She looked desperate." A part of me, the part that had been a mother for 42 years, felt a familiar pang of pain at the image of Claire suffering. But the new, more rational part of me, the part that had stared at the evidence of her betrayal for weeks, knew that her suffering was a direct result of her own choices. She needs to learn how to deal with the consequences of her actions. "Sharon," I said, my voice more steady than I felt. "But wasn't it a bit drastic?" Sharon asked, ever the gentle soul. "I mean, selling the car right out from under them. They are your family. After all." I looked at my dear friend, a woman with a heart of gold who sometimes couldn't see the steel required to protect oneself. "Sharon, they were systematically draining over $3,000 a month from my fixed income. They used my identity to secure a loan they couldn't get on their own. They lied to my face every single day, pretending to love me while they were robbing me. What part of that seems acceptable to you?" She sighed, stirring sugar into her coffee. "When you put it like that, it's hard to defend." "It's hard because it's indefensible," I said. I spent her entire life teaching her about honesty, respect, and gratitude. Apparently, the lessons didn't stick. That afternoon, I had an unexpected visitor. It was Mark's younger sister, Martha, a woman I had always considered sensible and down-to-earth. She arrived looking uncomfortable, clearly sent as a reluctant ambassador for the family. "Eleanor," she began, perching nervously on the edge of the sofa. "I came because I'm worried about this whole situation." "What situation is that, Martha?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "Well, Mark told me about the car, and the other, cancellations. He's a mess, Eleanor. He can't get to work. He's having to bum rides off colleagues. Claire is making herself sick with stress." It was fascinating how the narrative had already been spun. In their version, I was the villain, the cause of their suffering. There was no mention of the fraud, the stolen documents, the thousands of dollars siphoned from my account. I was just the cruel old woman who had pulled the rug out from under the innocent young family. Martha, do you know how they got that car? I asked calmly. She hesitated, avoiding my gaze. Mark said, there was a misunderstanding about the authorization. Misunderstanding is a very creative way to describe identity theft. I said, my voice sharp. But Eleanor, they're young. She pleaded. They made a mistake. Poor judgment call. Maybe if you just talked to them, you could all come to some kind of agreement. Martha, I interrupted, my voice firm. If your son used your social security number to take out a $75,000 loan without your permission, would you call that a poor judgment call? She was silent for a long moment, the directness of the question clearly hitting home. Probably not. She finally admitted. Then why should I? I asked. After Martha left, I thought about how everyone around them expected me to be the one to bend. They expected me to forgive, to forget, to fix it, as if being a mother and a grandmother was a life sentence of accepting any and all abuse, no matter how egregious. My role, seemed, was to absorb their mistakes and erase the consequences. But I was retired from that job, effective immediately. On Wednesday, the phone rang, and the caller ID showed Leo's name. My first instinct was a rush of warmth. I missed my grandson terribly. But as I answered, I sensed that this was not a spontaneous call. Grandma? He said, his voice sounding small and obviously coached. Can I talk to you? Of course. My sweet boy. How are you? I'm sad. Grandma, he said, and my heart constricted. Mom and Dad said you're mad at us. They said you don't want to be our family anymore. The manipulation was so blatant, so cruel. It took my breath away. They were using Leo, using his love for me and my love for him, as a weapon. It was the lowest they had sunk yet. Leo, I am not mad at you, I said, my voice gentle but firm. You haven't done anything wrong. This is about grown-up things. But why did you sell Dad's car? He asked, the rehearsed question sounding hollow. Now he can't pick me up from school. Leo, you're old enough to understand some things about money and responsibility, I said carefully. What I can tell you is that I was protecting something that belonged to me. But Grandma, we're family, he recited. Mom says family is supposed to share everything. The line had clearly been fed to him. I could almost hear Claire whispering it in his ear. Family shares when there is conversation and agreement and respect. Honey, when someone takes something without asking, that isn't sharing. That's taking. There was a silence on the other end, as if he was processing words that weren't in the script he'd been given. Then, his voice dropped to a fearful whisper. Grandma, Mom and Dad said if you don't help us, we're going to lose our house. That hit me like a physical blow. Their finances were so precarious, so dependent on my unwilling contributions, that the loss of that $2,000 a month was threatening their home. The thought of Leo being uprooted, of him being homeless, was a terrifying one. Leo, my love, those are things your parents need to figure out, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. You shouldn't be worrying about things like that. But I don't want to move. Grandma, I don't want to leave my school, he said. And then I heard a sob. The call ended with him crying, and I was left clutching the phone, my own hands trembling. They had reached the bottom of the barrel, using their own child's fear to try and blackmail me emotionally. That night, I almost called her. I almost gave in. The old Eleanor, the fixer, the rescuer, rose up inside me, screaming that I had to protect my grandson, no matter the cost. But then I remembered what my lawyer, Howard, had said to me. Eleanor, people who are constantly rescued from the consequences of their own actions never change their behavior. They just learn to expect the next rescue. On Thursday, Sharon brought more news from the outside world. Mark had officially been fired. Apparently, his transportation issues had led to chronic lateness and a poor attitude, giving his company the excuse they needed to let him go during a round of layoffs. Claire was desperately trying to pick up more shifts at the retail store where she worked part-time, but it wasn't nearly enough to cover their massive expenses. "Eleanor," Sharon said carefully, "don't you think it might be time to at least talk to them? This is getting really serious." "Sharon, do you think if I start giving them money again, they'll learn anything from this?" I asked pointedly. "Well, no, probably not," she admitted. "But it's so hard to watch your family suffer." "It is hard," I agreed, my voice heavy. "But sometimes, suffering is a necessary catalyst for growth. They built a life they couldn't afford on my back. Now they need to learn how to build a life they can afford on their own 2 feet." On Saturday, Claire appeared at my door. She looked different, thinner, with dark circles under her eyes. The expensive clothes had been replaced with a simple t-shirt and jeans. The absence of my money was leaving visible marks. "Mom," she said, her voice tired and stripped of its usual confidence, "can I come in?" I let her in but didn't offer her coffee or cookies like I always had. This was not a social visit. She sat on the edge of the sofa in my living room, looking around as if she were seeing it for the first time. "Mom, I came to apologize." That was a surprise. In my entire life, I couldn't remember Claire ever offering a truly meaningful apology for anything. "Apologize for what, exactly?" I asked, unwilling to make it easy for her. For using your documents without asking," she stammered. "For not talking to you first. For lying about Mark's promotion." It was a start, but I noticed she was carefully curating her apology, confessing only to the most obvious, undeniable actions, not to the overall attitude of exploitation. "And what about the $2,000 a month you were taking from my retirement?" I asked, my voice level. She looked down at her hands. "That was wrong, too." "And what about the $15,000 in loans you took over the past 2 years and never paid back?" A longer silence. "And what about treating me like a private bank, always available to solve your financial problems while ignoring any of mine?" "Mom," she said, her voice finally breaking, "I know we messed up. I know we were wrong. But we're desperate. Mark lost his job. We're behind on the mortgage. Leo is suffering. You are desperate, Claire, because you built a life you could not sustain," I said, my voice not unkind, but unyielding. "You built it with my money." "But you're my mother," she cried. The familiar refrain. Mothers are supposed to help their children. Mothers help their children when they are asked, when there is honesty, when there is gratitude. I countered. Mothers do not exist to be exploited. That is not in the job description. She began to cry then. Real tears this time. Not the crocodile tears of manipulation. They were tears of genuine despair. "Mom, I don't know what to do. We have nowhere to go." It was the single most difficult moment of the entire ordeal. To see my child, the person I had brought into this world and loved unconditionally, in a state of true desperation. Every maternal instinct I possessed screamed at me to wrap my arms around her and tell her everything would be okay, that I would fix it. But I knew, with a certainty that was as painful as it was clear, that if I yielded now, I would be setting the stage for this to happen all over again. The pattern would continue, perhaps in a different form, until one of us was gone. "Claire, you are adults," I said, my voice soft but resolute. "Mark is an educated man with professional experience. You are smart and capable. You can solve this situation, but you need to do it with your own resources." She stayed for a few more minutes, alternating between pleas and bargains. She offered to sign contracts, made fervent promises of repayment, swore they would never do anything like this again. But I held firm. When she finally left, I watched her walk down the street from my window. She no longer had a car to drive her away. She no longer had a limitless bank account to solve her problems. She no longer had an endlessly generous mother to fall back on. She had only herself and the consequences of her choices. In the weeks that followed, news trickled in through Sharon and other neighbors. Mark found a new job, but it paid less and was further away, forcing him to rely on public transportation. Claire had increased her hours at the retail store and taken on a second job waitressing on weekends. They had to sell their house in a short sale to avoid foreclosure and had moved into a small, two-bedroom apartment in a less affluent part of town. Leo had to change schools, give up some of his extracurricular activities, and adapt to a much more modest financial reality. The news about Leo was what hurt the most, but I knew that children are resilient. Living within his family's actual means would be better for his character in the long run than growing up in a fantasy propped up by his grandmother's stolen money. About a month after the confrontation, I ran into Mark at the supermarket. He looked visibly uncomfortable but approached me anyway. "Eleanor," he said hesitantly. "How are you?" "I'm well, Mark. And you?" I got a new job," he said, not meeting my eyes. "It's not as good as the old one, but we're managing." There was something different about him. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a humility I had never seen in him before. "That's good to hear," I said simply. "Work gives a man dignity." He looked up then, and his eyes were full of a shame that seemed genuine. "Eleanor, I wanted to apologize. For real. What we did, it was wrong. And I understand why you did what you did." It was the first time either of them had acknowledged not only that they were wrong, but that my actions were justified. It was a small crack of light in a very dark tunnel. "Thank you for saying that, Mark," I said. "Claire is she's still very hurt," he admitted. "But I think we both know that we created this situation. And in a way, maybe it was good for us to learn how to stand on our own." It was a stunning admission, coming from the man who had systematically exploited me. "You were always capable of standing on your own, Mark," I told him. "You just chose the easier path." "I know," he said quietly. "We're learning the right path now. The hard way." 2 weeks later, a letter arrived in my mailbox. It was from Leo, handwritten on notebook paper, the careful script of a teenager choosing his words. "Dear Grandma," it began, "I hope you are doing well. I wanted to tell you that I've gotten used to my new school, and I've made some cool friends. Dad said we can't go to Disney World for a while, but he promised that when he saves up enough money from his new job, honestly, we will go one day. I understand now that what my parents did with your money was wrong. They explained it to me better after you talked to them. I didn't know they were taking money from you without asking. That's really not cool. I hope that one day you can forgive us and be our family again. I miss you. Love, Leo." I wept as I read that letter, not with sadness, but with a fierce, aching pride. Miguel was learning the important lessons. Honesty, hard work, consequences, values his parents had forgotten but were now being forced to remember. And through it all, his love for me remained. 3 months after the confrontation, a new normal had settled in. Claire and Mark were working hard, living modestly, raising Leo within their actual financial reality. It wasn't a life of luxury, but it was an honest one. As for me, I was rediscovering the simple joy of having complete control over my own finances. Without thousands of dollars being siphoned off each month, I was able to build up my emergency fund, buy fresh, healthy food, and afford all my medications without having to choose. For the first time in years, I wasn't living on the edge. But more important than the money was the feeling of recovered dignity. I was no longer a resource to be tapped, a convenience to be used. I was a person with rights, and And boundaries. And it turned out, those boundaries were the greatest gift I could have given not only to myself, but to them as well. 6 months passed. 6 months of quiet, deliberate reconstruction. I woke up at 6 every morning, not out of obligation, but because I had discovered the pleasure of having the morning hours all to myself. I would make my coffee, sit on the small patio I had built with the leftover money from the car sale, and watch the garden I had planted come to life. The roses I'd put in the ground back in March were blooming now, their crimson petals a daily reminder that even after the harshest winters, spring eventually arrives for those who are patient enough to cultivate it. I tended to them with the same dedication I had once reserved for solving other people's problems, but this was a choice, not a duty. Sharon still came for coffee on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Her visits were a welcome anchor in my new routine. Today, she arrived with a thoughtful expression on her face, carrying news she knew would interest me, even if I pretended it wouldn't. "Eleanor," she said, helping herself to the lemon loaf I had started baking. "I saw Claire at the pharmacy yesterday." My heart gave a little flutter, as it always did at the mention of her name, but I kept my face serene. "Oh? How is she?" "Different," Sharon said, taking a bite of the cake. "Thinner. Yet, but not in an unhealthy way. She seems more grounded, more mature." She was buying cold medicine for Leo, paid in cash, counted out the bills carefully, like someone who knows the value of every single dollar. It was a strange image to conjure. Claire, who had always spent money with the breezy indifference of someone who assumed more would always appear from somewhere, usually from me. "She asked how you were," Sharon continued, and not in a prying way. She asked genuinely, like someone who truly misses her mother. "And what did you tell her?" I asked, my voice carefully neutral. "I told her you were well, that you were tending to your garden, reading a lot, and living in peace." Living in peace. 2 words that perfectly encapsulated these last 6 months. For the first time in decades, I woke up without a knot of anxiety in my stomach, without wondering what new family crisis I would have to solve, what bill I would have to pay, what invented emergency I would have to fund. "She gave me a message for you," Sharon said, her eyes watching me closely. My stomach tightened slightly. Was this the beginning of a new campaign? A new strategy to wear me down? What message? Sharon put down her fork. She said, "Please tell my mom that we're okay, that we're learning to stand on our own, and she doesn't need to worry about us. And tell her that, when she's ready, if she's ever ready, we'd love to have her back in our lives, but only when she wants to, and on her terms." I swallowed the lump that had formed in my throat. It was a message entirely different from all the previous attempts at manipulation and bargaining. It wasn't a demand or a plea. It was an offering of space, of respect. "That was it?" I asked, my voice a little thick. "She added one more thing," Sharon said softly. "She said she understands now why you did what you did, and that if the roles were reversed, she hoped she would have had the courage to do the same thing." I was silent for a long time after that, watching the crimson roses sway in the morning breeze. There was something in that message that sounded like real growth, like genuine, hard-won understanding. That afternoon, after Sharon had left, I sat in my favorite armchair with a book I was reading, one about setting healthy boundaries and the courage to be disliked. It was ironic that at 68, I was finally learning the relational skills I should have mastered decades ago. The phone rang around 3 o'clock. It was an unfamiliar number, but something told me to answer it. "Hello? Grandma? It's Leo." My heart soared. It was the first time we had spoken since that awful, manipulated call months ago. "Leo, my dear boy, how did you get my new number?" I asked Mom. He said, "She said I could call, but only if I promised not to ask for anything. Just to talk. If I wanted to." Interesting. Claire had given him permission but had also established a clear boundary. Perhaps she really was learning. How are you, my sweet boy? I'm good, Grandma. It's different, but it's good. I wanted to tell you about my new life. For the next 20 minutes, Leo told me about his new school, where he had made real friends who liked him for who he was, not for the car his dad drove. He talked about how his father was working 2 jobs now, how he was tired all the time but seemed happier, prouder of himself. He told me his mom had started a night class at the community college to get a certification in her field, paying for it with her own money. Grandma, he said, his voice more mature than I remembered. I get why you did it now. Mom and Dad explained it properly. They were taking your money without asking. And that's stealing, even if you're family. And how do you feel about that, Leo? I asked gently. At first I was just sad and mad, he admitted. But then I understood that they were the ones who were wrong, not you. And you know what? I think I like our life better now. Why is that? Because now, everything we have is ours. For real. Dad is so proud when he gets his paycheck. And Mom gets so happy when she can buy something with her own money. Before, they always seemed a little guilty. You know? Like they knew they were doing something wrong. The simple wisdom of a 16-year-old boy astounded me. He had articulated something profound. That earned dignity is worth more than stolen luxury. You are a very wise young man, Leo. I told him, my voice thick with emotion. You taught us that, Grandma, he said. You taught us that family isn't about taking. It's about respecting and caring for each other. When we hung up, I sat holding the phone, my eyes wet with tears. They weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of pride. Leo was becoming the man of integrity I had always hoped he would be. And ironically, it was my act of cruelty that had taught him, and his parents, the most important lessons about character. A few weeks later, I received another letter from Claire. It was long, carefully written, and I read it 3 times before I could fully process it. Mom, it began. I know I have no right to expect you to even read this, but I have to write it anyway. These past months have been the hardest and, I now realize, the most important of my adult life. I started therapy because I thought I needed to find a way to fix things with you, to convince you to forgive me. But I discovered that the problem wasn't you. It was me. It was the person I had become. Someone who believed she was entitled to everything without earning anything. I remember when I was a child, and you worked 2 jobs to give me a better life. I remember 1,000 gestures of love that I received, and that at some point, I started to see as my due, not as a gift. What we did with your documents was a crime. There is no other word for it. It wasn't a mistake or a misunderstanding. It was a crime. And we did it to the one person who loved us unconditionally. These months have taught us how to live within our means. It was hard, and sometimes humiliating, but it has also been liberating. Mark is working 2 jobs and I have never seen him so proud. I went back to school and rediscovered abilities I had forgotten I had. And Leo is learning values that I hope he will carry with him forever. I am not writing to ask for your forgiveness. I know that is something that must be earned, and it takes time. I am writing to say thank you. Thank you for having the courage to show us we were on the wrong path. Thank you for loving us enough to say no. Thank you for teaching us, in the most painful way possible, the meaning of dignity. If you ever want to know this new version of our family, we would be honored, but only if and when you want to, and on the terms that make sense to you. We no longer want to be a burden in your life. We want to be a choice. With love and, finally, with respect. Claire. I finished the letter with tears streaming down my face. It was relief. Relief that my daughter had finally, truly understood. That she had grown. That the seeds of character I had planted in her so long ago had not died, but had merely been dormant. 2 weeks after that, on a bright Saturday morning, I was watering my roses when I saw Leo walking up my driveway. He was taller, more confident, and he was carrying a small potted plant. "Grandma," he said, a little shyly, "can I come in?" "Of course, my dear." He stepped into the garden and looked around. "It's beautiful here. Grandma, you always had a green thumb." "Thank you, Leo. What have you brought me?" "It's a jasmine plant," he said, holding it out. "I bought it with the money from my new weekend job. I wanted to give it to you. If you'll accept it." A weekend job. He was working, learning the value of $1, the dignity of his own effort. "Of course I accept it. Honey, it's beautiful. Where do you think we should plant it?" We spent the morning together in the garden, finding the perfect sunny spot for the jasmine, talking about life and dreams and values. He told me how proud he was of his parents for turning things around. "Grandma," he said as he was about to leave, "Mom and Dad would really love to see you. Not to ask for anything, just to be a family again. But they said to tell you, only if you want to." I looked at my grandson, this wonderful young man who had navigated a family crisis with more grace and wisdom than the adults. "I still need some more time, Leo," I said honestly. "But I want you to know that seeing you today, seeing the man you are becoming, fills my heart with so much pride." "I understand, Grandma," he said, and gave me a hug. "And thank you for teaching me what's right, even when it hurt." After he left, I stood in the garden, looking at the small jasmine plant we had planted together. It was still small, fragile, but it had strong roots and the potential to grow and fill the air with beauty. Like our family, perhaps. Like any relationship rebuilt on a foundation of respect and healthy boundaries. That evening, sitting on my patio with a cup of tea, I looked up at the stars and reflected on my journey. I had lost the family I once knew, the one based on obligation and exploitation. But perhaps, in the future, I could build a new one, based on choice, respect, and genuine love. For now, I was at peace with the silence. The silence had allowed me to rediscover who I was, beyond the roles of mother and grandmother. The silence had taught me that chosen solitude is better than company that diminishes you. The silence had given me back my dignity. Sharon was right. I was living in peace. It was a peace I had fought for, a peace I had earned. And if, one day, I chose to break that silence and invite my family back into my life, it would be a free and conscious choice. It would be on my terms. For I had finally learned that the greatest love story you can ever live is the one where you learn to love and respect yourself first.